Hey there, I wanted to do this tutorial to show how to integrate the SKG shooter framework with the Smart Locomotion plugin slash project using the third person template from the Unreal Engine games template. So this is just basically going through how to set it up so that you're starting kind of from scratch. So the last video that I posted was about how to integrate the two example projects, the SKG Shooter Framework example project with the Smart Locomotion project, which is kind of its own example project. I found that to be helpful in a sense where you can it works. They work together well, but it's also fragile. The character blueprints, the animation blueprint, and the frameworks themselves are complex, and so getting them to work well together in a robust way that you know how to fix. Like if it breaks, you know what you did and you know why it broke. Um, that's something that was difficult with just merging those two complex example projects. So this is about starting kind of from scratch. So let me just tell you where we're starting from. Okay, so I'm assuming that you have at this point, if you're looking at this tutorial, that you've gone through the SKG shooter framework tutorials 2 through I would say at least 4, and then adding in 7 for the fixing of the character animation stuff. If you've done more than this and gone all the way through 10, awesome. If not, then you should definitely do up to 7, even just to start where I'm at, because the project that I'm going to be showing you has already done that. So let me go ahead and just show you where this project is right now. So right now you can see that I've got um, the SKG shooter framework implemented with aiming and with the firearm, my own custom firearm. Okay, but you can see down when I look down at the legs, there's no turning in place. There's no, the character's movement is just the same kind of movement forward and backward. There's no backward leg movement. So there's none of that, right? Because we're using the very simple anim BP that comes with the shooter game um, kit that has been modified for the third person um, example project in the sneaky shooter kit um, anim BP kind of in the tutorials. So let me go ahead and stop this. Okay, so right now, if we go into, and I have my folders um, labeled and colored the way that I like. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and color this one. Kind of a blue color. Say okay to that. Okay, so in here, so if you go into Blueprints, Character, you can see that I've taken the third person character and I've made it into my own character here. And I have copied all of the NMBPs that I need into my own folder. Okay, so you can see that they've been copied over and renamed. That's something that you will do as a part of the Sneaky Kitty Games framework tutorials. That's something that you will do in the tutorial series. So you should be using that as good practice when you can. You can always move things later, but I tend to just move them over into my own folders and rename them when necessary. So yeah, so this is the currently the animation graph for the character that you're seeing me use in the example project level. And this is the example, this is basically the animation graph that you'll end up with at the end of the Sneaky Kitty Games tutorials. So you should end up with this anim graph, basically. If you don't end up with this anim graph, something like this, where you have some basic locomotion stuff feeding into the control rig, and then using the animation procedurals into the upper body, doing the upper body split with the blend mask that's set up, and then adding the two-bone hand IK and arm IK at the end of that chain. If you haven't gotten to this point, you need to go back to do those tutorials to get to this point. I don't want to redo the things that he's done in the tutorials. I want to start from that place where you've kind of done those tutorials. Okay, so that's where we're starting from, is this NMBP from the tutorials at the end of the Sneaky Kitty Games tutorials with a basic character set up. That again, this character none of this should be new. Okay, so this should, if you've done the Sneaky Kitty Games tutorials, this is exactly what he sets up. So once you do that, this is the character blueprint that you should end up with. Okay, so none of this should be new to you. If you're looking at this now, you should see this and you should go, okay, yeah, I've gotten to this place. Okay, if it's not, if it's all new to you, you need to go back and do those tutorials. Let me just make it clear again, just kind of what where I'm starting from again. So I'm using the UE5 mesh. His tutorials use the UE4 mesh. My suggestion for anyone that's new to Unreal is just use the UE5 mesh. You're going to find a lot less problems in the long run with retargeting, with having to learn how to do complex retargeting stuff of animations. And these two projects both use the UE5 mannequin and Smart Locomotion and the SKG example project. So you shouldn't have any problems with switching to the different between the two different meshes without having to retarget or do any of that stuff. Okay, so my suggestion again, UE5 mesh is kind of the future mesh, the one you'll be using, and start there, use that. It makes everything much easier. You're not dealing with weird IK bone stuff, any problems like that. So yeah, that's where I'm starting. UE5 mesh. Okay. So given that we're starting with this mesh and we've gotten to that place in the project, the first thing you're going to want to do is just migrate Smart Locomotion over into this third person template project. So you've already gotten the shooter game framework in there, and I've got Smart Locomotion in here. Another good practice, just so you know, is to um, in my mind, is to install the plugin in your plugins folder of your project. So if we go to this project and you see the plugins folder, I've put the plugin here in the plugins for the project. So that way, if the plugin gets updated on the engine side, because it is an engine plugin, you won't be, you can choose basically whether or not you want to upgrade this and when. Otherwise, you'll update the engine plugin and things in your project could break. So my suggestion, install the SKG Shooter framework into your plugins folder. If you don't have a plugins folder, just create this plugins folder and add it. Copy it from where it's installed in the engine and just copy it here and it'll use this plugin. Okay. So those are the things, kind of the starting points that are maybe say different from, or in addition to where the SKG shooter framework thing kind of project leaves you with those tutorials. All right. So starting there, let's start looking at what we need to do to get the Smart Locomotion integrated with the SKG shooter framework and the animation blueprint. In my last tutorial, I showed that we used the Smart Locomotion animation graph, the anim graph, because it is a more complex graph, and therefore it's easier to start with that graph than it is to it's easier to start with this graph as your starting point than it is to start building this from scratch. So there's no need to build this from scratch. You can use this as it is and we'll modify it to suit our needs. Okay, so so start here, start with this. Okay, so going back to that, then, okay, so once you do that, once you get this Smart Locomotion kind of set up, you'll see right away you're going to have compile errors, okay? So these compile errors are related to the physical surface node that is being used to indicate when your character is walking over different physical surfaces, and physical surfaces are kind of a powerful thing in Unreal Engine that allows you to define physical properties per surface, including what they sound like how much things bounce on them, and other kinds of physical properties. Usually you'll see them used for sound. So these four, grass, wood, wet, and metal, these four things need to be added to your project settings in order for you to get rid of these errors in your node. So let's go to project settings. If you scroll down to physics, you'll see here in physics these physical surfaces. So you always have default, and so what we want to do is we want to add the other ones that are required by Smart Locomotion. So metal, what was the other one? Wet, and I think wood was the last one. So wood, okay. Okay, so once those are added there, you don't have to do anything else, just add them there. come back to your anim BP, try to recompile, and you'll see, okay, wait, I did that, but now it's not doing anything. We have to go to this node here, and you have to click refresh. So right click, refresh, and that'll refresh that node. It'll say, okay, yeah, look, I'm looking for the things I need. Boom, okay. So now you can compile this blueprint with this project. Okay, so once you've done that, this is pretty much good to go. Okay, so let's go back over here and let's take this thing and we're going to duplicate it to our own folder. Okay, so we're going to go into our game folder, character, animations. Let me just make sure I didn't already do this. Yeah, I did not do this yet. So let's go back to characters, animations. Yep, there it is. Okay, so we're going to take this thing here and we're just going to move it over here to animations. Boom. We're going to copy there. Always copy, just so that you have the original if you need to go back. And then here it is. Now you can see that it's using a different skeleton than the skeleton we're using. The skeleton we're using is just the basic third-person template skeleton, but it is a UE5 mannequin skeleton. So there's several ways you can get these to be compatible. Right now they won't be compatible. I'm going to show you the easiest way to do that. So I'm just going to go ahead and save everything. And so I'm going to take this, I'm going to basically rename it. Okay, so I'm going to call this BP anim. I'm going to name it what my project name is. Okay, I'm going to call it base. Okay, so I just renamed it to what I want it to be renamed to, BP anim on metal character base. Okay, and so if I open it up, it's the same thing, it's just moved and copied and changed. Compiles fine, no problems. Okay, great. So once you're at this point, then what we want to do is we want to change what skeleton this is using. So going back to here, if you right click, you can assign a skeleton. This is the simplest way to do this if you have the exact same skeleton that you're using for your project and for the other. If the UE5 mannequin skeleton is ostensibly the same with no changes, then you can do that. And by no changes, I mean bone hierarchy. Once you've gotten to the end of the Sneaky Kitty Games tutorial, you will have a skeleton that is, that is here, that has all of the virtual bones on it. That doesn't matter when it comes to retargeting as much if you're using the same skeleton. So you should have all these sockets and cameras and stuff. So sockets and virtual bones on this skeleton. That shouldn't make any difference from when you go to change this skeleton. So I'm going to take this anim BP and I'm going to right click. I'm going to say assign skeleton, and in this list I'm going to find the skeleton that I'm using. Again, I'm using the simple. I'm using the mannequin from the third person template, so you can look down here and that's located in game characters mannequins meshes. So I'm going to choose that one. Yeah, just making sure if that's the one. Accept. Okay, so now this anim BP should compile no problem, right? And because I have this asset with the gun as a preview mesh, it's going to show up in there, but it doesn't have any of the procedural set up yet, so that's fine. Okay, so if I go back to here, you can now see that this skeleton is associated with this particular anim BP, okay? And if I go and I take this anim BP and I associate it with my character right now, okay, so I'll just do this. I'm going to go ahead and take it and put it in there, right? So if I compile this and then I play the game, play this level, you'll see that I have a lot of problems, right? There's all these issues. Okay, which is no problem. We're going to fix all that. Okay, so let's go back. All right. So let us go back to let's close this one. We don't need it. Let's close that. We don't need it. So going back to here, let's go back to here and so we'll take that, no problem. Okay, cool. So here's the anim BP for Smart Locomotion, renamed for our project. If I go to the if I go here to the anim graph, it's unchanged, so it's the same exact thing. And we're going to change this one step at a time. And I really do suggest that anytime you do this kind of stuff, you You just make one change, try things. Make one change, try things. That's the best way to kind of keep track of where you are. It's very easy to get lost in the labyrinth of changes. You assume you know something, and before you know it, you've broken something, and you don't know which step along the line you've broken it. So always good practice, just do one change, come back, play, see what happens, do the thing, change again. Okay. So, okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we need to make sure we have the interfaces and the procedurals copied and all that stuff. So if we go back to my game, this is what I've using for my root folder, basically for the specific things for my project. So there's that. So I go to blueprints, go to character, and I have animations here. I have the ABP, this is the original thing, and then I've got the link layers here, right? So these are copied from the Sneaky Kitty Games project and renamed here. So I have this one here and I have this one here. Now, we just need to make sure that this here, and this is something you will have done already in the Sneaky Kitty Games frameworks tutorials, but just checking to make sure that the same anim layer interface that you've used for this anim layer blueprint is being used by your main blueprint. Okay, it has to be being used by your main blueprint. So this is going to become our main blueprint. So if I go to class settings, Smart Locomotion has a anim layer interface already, or another kind of interface, a blueprint interface implemented in it already. We're going to add this, we're going to add ours. So this is the one that I created, it's custom, the one I copied and renamed, which is all I've done really with it. I'm going to go ahead and add that here. And the reason I can add that is because these are on the same skeleton, right? So this animation blueprint's using the same skeleton as that. So we're good to go. So if I compile that, everything should be good. And once I compile that, you can see I've got the Sneaky Kitty Games procedural layer down here in animation layers. So here it is now. Now what I can do with this, I can drag it out onto the canvas, and there it is. Okay. So if you double click this right now, it's just going to go to this empty graph. Okay, don't do the thing which you think you need to do, which is to click this and put it over through here. As far as I know, that'll bypass. So that's more like a bypass. So let these be unconnected. It's a little bit counterintuitive, but yeah, don't connect those. Okay, so in order to get this associated with the exact procedural anim layer graph that we want to use, we need to instance class. We need to choose that from here. So once again, I've copied that and made my own version of that. That should be here, and you can see the path to it is down below in the description. So there you go. So there it is, and then compile, right? And so this is now associated with this. So that's what it's doing. It's taking in a specific instant class and putting it, piping it through into that blueprint. Okay. So this, I'm not changing this, right? So I'm not doing anything to this except just leaving it what it is right now. So I haven't done any changes to the anim layer procedural anim layers. There's no changes to this. In my previous tutorial, I disconnected the shoulder swapping. In this tutorial, as far as I remember, I am not going to be doing that unless we run into problems, but I don't think we should. So this is all standard, all the same. Okay. So compile that, make sure that's good. I'm just going to close that. We don't really need to look at that right now. Okay. So now I've got this here, right? Okay. So what I am going to show you that I have done up to this point is I have, in the process of getting to where I showed you I am with this, I've done one or two other things. Okay, so if I go back to animations, you can see this is the Manny M4 idle pose, okay, that is being used by the weapon that, for the tutorial, okay, the tutorial weapon, the M4, that comes with the example project. I just duplicated this. Okay, it's associated now with my skeleton, okay, because I did the same exact thing. I just replaced the skeleton with the skeleton of my choice. Since they're all using UE5 skeletons, you can replace the skeleton with your skeleton, and then copy it, rename it. And if we go in here, the only thing I've done to this is I have simply taken, you know, like he shows you in the tutorials. This is a single frame animation, and all I've done is I've used the virtual bones on the skeleton, so VB IK handgun, and I've keyed that and positioned it so the weapon that I'm using is appropriate to the hand position and arm position that I am using. And so you can do this by, like he shows you in the tutorial and other tutorials out there online to do this. You can rotate these bones. You can select any of these bones, and you can, rotate them basically, or move them, or change them. And when you do that, you'll want to key them first and then move them and then key them after you've moved it. So you can't move this and then move that and then move this and move that and move this and then try to key everything. Once you've made a change, you're going to move on to another bone. You've got to key it at that point. Okay. So I've just changed the hand and thumb and all that stuff so that when this IK snaps to where it should on the weapon, the thumb and the hand position and the arm positions are more correct to this weapon. Of course, the IK is not running in here, so that's why this is not in the right position. But once the IK does relocate itself, that'll snap down there. So that's all I've done in this animation is I've made my own custom animation by literally copying this, the one from the Sneaky Kitty Games frameworks, and I've copied it and manipulated it to be for my weapon, and that's all I've done. If you're going to stick with the M4, there's no need to change this. If you do have a custom weapon, then you want to change that. Depending on the cosmetics and the positioning of the gun, it can, make a difference. So yeah, so modify one if you've got a different gun, and that's really the way that this is set up. Sneaky Kitty Game, like intended to be set up, Sneaky Kitty Games framework kind of forces you to do the work that you think, oh, I'll just do that later. All AAA games have custom animations per weapon, and so this is kind of forcing you to do that kind of early, earlier than in some other techniques. But this is the proper way. You'd have an animation set up for each and every one of your weapons, and when you swap between weapons, you'll swap between different idle poses, and that'll look the best because you're looking at the weapon so closely. In a first-person shooter, that's kind of important. So that kind of forces you to do that as a workflow, and that's fine. This is easy to do. Okay. So enough about that. So that's the other thing that I've got, and the reason I'm bringing that up is because you can see that in this original anim graph. This is the anim graph that you'll end up with at the end of the Kitty Games tutorial. I'm using this idle pose versus the M4 idle pose. Okay, so that's why you're going to see this one connected and this one disconnected. Okay, so I have my own custom idle pose here. So back to the Smart Locomotion anim BP that we are going to start modifying, we've added our procedural layer here. Okay, and so what we want to do is we want to take our idle pose that we're going to use. Again, I'm going to use the one that I have created, and you can find that down here in the list, all of the animations that you have that are associated with your skeleton that can be dragged into the anim BP because they're associated with your skeleton are located in this asset browser list, and here's the one that I'm using. So I'm going to drag it in, drop it in there, and I'm going to connect it up. Okay, so now that's connected up. So, in essence, because we're going step by step, what we're doing really is we're just taking what we have here kind of, right? And we're just using the same logic because we know this works, and we're just adapting what we know works here in this anim BP to work with the Smart Locomotion BP, right? That's what we're doing. We're just saying, okay, this works, so let's get this to work given that this logic gets the result that we want. And what we want from this, especially just at least in this beginning stage, is we want the turn in place, we want the foot IK, we want the orientation warping to work with our, our movement animations, and we want all the stride warping stuff. We want all this stuff to work to add to what we have already working. But we're starting with something that already works, and so we want to not break this along the way. We want to incorporate the same logic into this new thing. Okay, just to be super clear, I'm just trying to be really clear. If I'm getting redundant, I apologize. I'm just trying to be super clear. Okay, so There's a couple things I know we need to do right from the beginning that I'm just going to do from the beginning, okay? Because I've done this before and I did it in the last tutorial, so I'm just going to do it now. This aiming stuff, since we're using the procedurals, we don't need it, so let's just get it out of the way. All this aiming stuff that comes with Smart Locomotion, we don't need it. So I'm going to just take all this stuff and just, you know, make sure I don't grab that, and just take all this and just move it out of the way. Don't need it. Okay, what does that mean here? It means that, you know, I need to use one of these cached aim offsets, um, because I need what's coming out of here to go back into here. Okay, and I'm going to change that in a second, but I just want to be clear that, like, if you're going to disconnect something, you got to connect it through. So that's coming out of here. Now it's going into there. We've totally gotten rid of all this stuff. Okay. So, okay, now the next thing that I know we need to do here is let's go ahead and try to get our procedural anim layers just basically working with our uh, body. Oh, you know what? I just remembered something that I need to tell you about before we go any further, just because I remembered it. So this is a little bit out of order, but before you do any of this, okay? This will not, none of this NMBP will work unless you do a very critical thing here. So make sure that you go up into your plugins, okay, so edit plugins, and you need to go down to animation, and you need a few of these plugins installed. So I go over this in my last tutorial, but just so it's clear. Animation Locomotion Library, Animation Warping, which allows us to do stride orientation warping and slope warping, and the motion warping, which I think that Smart Locomotion probably is using for like mantling and vaulting to get over objects. If it isn't using that now, it likely will start using that, I imagine. So just have all of these enabled. So once you enable those, you have to restart the editor, blah, blah, blah. But you know, you need to have these enabled, otherwise you won't be able to do what I'm doing now. Okay. So sorry, I should have said that in the beginning, but there you go. You need to have those plugins installed. Okay, so now we're going to try to get procedurals working on the upper body. And so you can see that in the Smart Locomotion animation graph, right, all of the main locomotion state is running in here, okay? And so that's all the ladder and all the swimming and all the different types of locomotion states are all kind of connected together with the booleans that are required for all that stuff here, okay? So that's good. We like that. That's complicated. That's complex. It's already set up for us because that's what the plugin is. It's running through a default slot. It's going through a blend poses by bool. This boolean is really just about, like, am I dead? Am I not dead? If I'm not dead, then just run this stuff through to here. Body split is being split off here so that we can kind of cache it and branch to two different flow states and split up the lower body and the upper body. We want rotating the root bone and turn in place to really only affect the lower body, and anything we're going to do with the upper body is going to get split into its own um, upper body slot on our skeleton, and then that's going to be piped to this layered blend per bone. Okay, so this layered blend per bone, this is the way it comes in the Smart Locomotion NMBP, and that is to say the blend mode is a branch filter blend mode. But in the Sneaky Kitty Games shooter frameworks tutorials, he sets up a custom blend mask on the skeleton. So you already should have done that as a part of those tutorials. And if we go back to the NMBP we know works, it's here, right? So you can see this is the same layered blend per bone relative to upper body and lower body splitting. But now, because you've set this up with the Sneaky Kitty Games tutorials, this is using the blend mask, right? And this blend mask is on your skeleton that you're using, okay? So let's go back here, and what we just need to do with this is go ahead and change this to blend mask. And then in this array, we need to just choose the blend mask that we made. So mine was called FPS blend mask, so I just set it there, compile, and now that's using the blend mask that we need to use that's associated with how the procedurals are being split from the upper body, lower body in the Sneaky Kitty Games procedural anim layers and other things. Okay, so now that that's done, we have this, and so what we could basically do is we can just go ahead and take this, and we don't need this upper body, this body split here. We can take this and just pipe it right into the upper body, okay? All right, so once we do that, you can see here in the preview, boom, right? This is um, already looking pretty good, right? Because I've already set up my firearm with all the IK hand bones, and I've already set it up with the IK handgun stuff. I've already done all of that stuff. This hand we'll deal with in a second. Um, because I've already done all of that work, I'm popping into something that's, pretty close to being what we want already, but it's not there just yet, but it's pretty close, right? So I'm going to go ahead and compile, and let's go ahead and just play this, and let's see where we are now. Okay, so now you can see that I'm almost there, but I don't have anything connected just yet, right? My something's not quite working yet, right? And that's because we don't have the hand IK stuff set up at the back of the NMBP chain yet. We're going to set that up next, but so you can see that. But my hands are in the right position. The gun is kind of where it ought to be in a sense. If I F8 out of that, right? And look at this character, you can see that wow, it's fast. Uh, you can see that the hand is kind of not quite where it should be because the IK is not set up, but the weapon in general is sitting kind of where it should, relationship to the character. Okay, so go ahead and stop that. So let's go ahead and come back to the NMBP here, and let's do a couple things before we get that set up. Well, maybe I'll let you see what it's like to not do some of these other things over here, and let's just set up the hand IK stuff first. So let's go here, and so we already are here, right? So that we can just go ahead and grab these nodes, and we can just copy them. I'm not changing them at all, just bringing them over here, and I'm just going to paste them in here. Okay. So once they're in here, we don't need this here, we need it here, right? Because these are all IK in the same space. Um, yeah, but okay, so before I connect those in, let me just do this one thing. All right, so this is for leaning, okay, in the Smart Locomotion plugin. This is for leaning. This will use the pelvis bone and lean it if you want to use leaning. But we're going to be using any leaning we do is going to come from the Sneaky Kitty Games framework's leaning, because that's going to be directly associated with all of the procedurals that are here that are all about aiming, right? So we want to lean and aim and still be able to connect those two things together. So this is something we don't want in our chain. So I'm going to go ahead and unhook that just to make it easy on us now. But we do want to modify this root bone by raising it up off the ground 1 unit, so that when we do our leg IK stuff, our foot IK, we're starting above the ground, so our feet have something to seek with the line trace down to and then snap to. So we're going to go ahead and take this and bring it up and connect it in there. Okay, so now because we're still in the same IK chain, we don't need this component to local here yet, so we're going to just go ahead and connect this in here, right? And then we're going to connect this in here and come up here like this. Obviously, if you've done this before, you'll know that if you don't have this component in there, it'll just bring it back to you. Like what I'm saying is, if you don't have that there and you try to do this, it'll bring one for you there. Okay. So yeah, so now that's all the hand IK stuff kind of in the chain from where we are. We haven't done anything else, right? So all we've done so far is hook these up to the upper body, and all we've done over here is hook up the hand IK stuff. So let's compile that. And you can see my hand starts to snap in a more, in a more precise way there. Okay, so let's go back here and go to the, let's go ahead and again, let's test again. So here we are. And you can see I've got aiming, right? Now I've got aiming, and you can see if I shift F1, if I F8 out, right? Then my hands are in the right place now, right? And everything's looking good. We're aiming, and we have our hands in the right place that we set up with that idle animation that we set up, and everything's good. So let me go ahead and do this, okay? And so let's just make sure, we always want to do this. I mean, it'll work, but I just want to be clear that we should always be doing this. You want to test on not 2 but 3 of the number of players. Change it to a listen server, and you want to play on 3. So let's go ahead and do that, and I'll tell you why. So one of these will be in the editor, and the other 2 of these will be. You know what? Let's not do that. Let's go to new editor window, so that we can move all these around and not hide them. Okay, so I know you probably know this already, but if you don't, it's important to know that the difference between the server, the proxy, and the autonomous proxy, these are all actually different and have a different net mode to each one. So doing two is only looking at two of the net modes. Looking at three is looking at all three net modes. What's happening on the server, what's happening on the client, and what's happening on the client's simulated proxy. So um, okay, so let's just make sure that this guy's kind of locked into place because he's between those two. So let's go to this one, move him out of the way. Okay, so you can see I don't have any foot movement, right? So what's happening is I don't have any actual foot movement yet, and there's some reasons for that, and we'll go over that in a second. But so this is a problem, right? But I can do all my procedural stuff, just don't have any feet moving yet. But I do have feet IK, right? So I do have feet IK. So that's something that tells us something. Our feet are still doing IK stuff. They're just not moving when we move, right? So what does that indicate? Well, it indicates that we don't have really any directional speed data or anything like that going into the character animation blueprint. We don't have any of that stuff going into the blueprint, and there's a reason, and we haven't done it because we haven't set it up yet. And it's not too difficult. Okay, but just to show you that's what's going on. So you see the leg hopping back and forth. You may end up with another problem. So let's just show on all the, because it's relative to who can see what, right? So this character, so the server sees the movement correctly, the clients see the movement on each other correctly, so everyone's seeing everyone else's movement correctly, so that means it's all being replicated correctly. All that stuff is good, right? You want to be checking that. That's why we're running 3 windows. Okay, but nobody's legs are working, even on their own or relative to another. So even if I move, I'm looking down on my own local client, none of that stuff is working, right? Okay, cool. So we'll get that there. All right, so so why don't we go ahead and just go do that now? Let's take care of that now. So what that requires then is we start looking at the Smart Locomotion character as an example. Again, since we're not just wholesale just trying to use this character, we're building up our own character step by step. We can just use this as a template for looking at how this is implemented in this project because we know this kind of works, right? So we'll do that. We'll use this as basically as a map. Okay. So, so let me just say one more thing because I'm pretty sure I already did this. Yeah. Okay. So what I've done here, and you'll see that this is here. Okay. We go to begin play in the Smart Locomotion blueprint, and you'll see this often in kind of template projects. There's no player controller set up or movement mapping context and stuff is set up, on the character. Okay. So we really don't want this here. You can have it here, of course, if you get the player controller to it and get the player controller. You can basically do the setup in your character. But what this is kind of indicating is that we really want to do this in the player controller, and it's best practice to do that in the player controller. So I've already done that, right? So I've taken all of this kind of begin play logic, and there's a reason for that that has to do with the Sneaky Kitty Games framework and spawning the web. So let me show you where that is. So if we go back to here and I open the controller, I've set it up the way that the Sneaky Kitty Games framework has it set up in the player controller. So this is basically exactly what that is. Okay, and you need this local controller check, right, to make sure that you're only doing this in local controller. You're grabbing the input local player subsystem and you're doing a valid check, and then you're going into your mapping context here. So that's basically what's happening from here forward, but we're doing it now in the player controller, kind of where it belongs. Okay, mostly it belongs, it's more appropriate to do it here. And this mapping context, let's go look at that. I've copied that over to my own input folder, and if we look at what that is, it's the basic third person movement stuff. So it's just simple stuff, right? I remember I'm doing one step at a time. So jump, move, look, all that stuff is here, all right, from the third person template, but I'm adding in the things that I need, right? So I've added aim here, okay, and I've added shoot. Okay, so those are the two things. I haven't implemented this logic yet, but aiming I do have. Okay, so so if you don't know how to do this, okay, AI aim is here. Okay, there's tutorials out there that will show you how to set up an input action. All right, but you can just copy the ones that are in this project, in these projects that are working, move them to your folder, and use them and associate them with your input mapping context, and just copy. Just take it, make sure it's set up the exact same way, make sure all the settings are the same. If you copied it, they shouldn't change anyways. And then you just associate that with this in your list of things, right? So you can go ahead and just do that. And so this is my input mapping context from my player controller. Okay, so I would suggest that you do this, that you put your mapping context into the player controller and don't put it on your character. All right. So I just want to be clear about that because we'll get back to that in a second. Close that. We don't really need it. I'm going to close this. We don't need it anymore. I'm going to close this. We don't need it. That we don't need. But we do want to be looking at all these things. So I'll move this over here. So we have two characters and two NMBPs. Okay. So where were we? We're going to try to get the legs working with our character now, right? So what does this character have that our character doesn't have? Well, a lot, okay, but relative to movement, it doesn't have a critical thing. This character has the blueprint component for movement in it, okay, for the smart locomotion, but our character doesn't have that yet, right? So, but we have the project in our project. So if we look here and we just look up like the name of it, AC underscore movement, there it is, right? So we can add it. Okay. So we can add it, and when we add it, it's got a bunch of defaults here, which we can tweak later on, but for now we're just going to leave them what they are. Then we can get movement stuff set up so that it's going to pipe through and do the variables that are being set up for the NMBP, right? So let's go ahead and look at this thing. So if you right click and go to edit, you can edit this, and you're going to go to this weird kind of place within it. So let's just close those and we'll open them if needed. Okay, but the main event graph is here. Okay, and you can see that on begin play, it's going to find your character, get the owner, and start setting some of these initial variables within this component. Okay, one of the things to note right away, okay, about this, and we'll deal with this in a second, but is that the character movement with component for the not character movement component, the Unreal one, but this AC movement component from Smart Locomotion, it's relying on the camera, and we'll get to that in a second. But just to note that the camera is associated with the movement component, so we're going to need both, but I'll show you why when we get there. But just to note that the AC camera component, which is also part of Smart Locomotion, is going to be associated with some of the functionality in just moving the character in the right way. Okay. We've got move forward, move right, move X, crouch, sprint, leaning. This is the leaning from that particular project. We're not going to use that. Um, anyways, so let's go back and look at the character and see where some of the stuff is leveraged. So let's go to the basics. So these are the movement inputs. So IA move, okay, and then this is calling the AC movement components version of move right and move forward. So these are not the standard character movement functions. These are functions within the component. Okay, so we need to use these move right and move forward to start with. So let's go back to our character, and we do have the IA move working. Okay, so this is the same input action, but we are doing the standard default target is pawn, add movement input, target is pawn. These are the built-in Unreal Engine movement functions, and we need to get rid of those, and we need to use the ones from the AC movement component. So I am a person who, especially when testing, always just kind of, either screenshots or remembers, okay, that, this is coming off of triggered, here it's coming off of triggered and completed, right? So we've got to kind of take note of that. So triggered and completed are coming into move right, move forward. And so let's go ahead and remember that. So, but I'm going to go ahead and disconnect this and disconnect these, okay, and just take all of these things. Well, let's do this. Let's take this and do that. Take all of this stuff, And I don't usually delete things. I just move them out of the way so that I don't have to, I can still see the way they're working. And if I have to go backwards, I can go backwards. All right. Okay, so now what we want to do is grab AC movement component, right? And it's got its own functions in there. Now you can copy paste things if you want, because now these are moving on their own, but I don't tend to do that very often because I want to make sure everything I mean, when I'm doing this, I'm actually learning, right? I'm learning what this is doing and I'm figuring how it works out. Someone, I've purchased a machine, which is the ACE, the smart movement plugin, and I'm now trying to figure out how does this machine work so that I'm not just a slave to it. I can actually manipulate it and use it. Okay, so so I'm going to build it kind of from scratch here. All right, so AC movement, we're going to go and get move right. So if I get move forward and move right, okay, and we'll put this in the right order in a second. Um, Control D. You can always just grab off this again. Okay, move right. Okay. So I think they have them in this order. Move right first and then move forward first, if I remember right. Move right, move forward. Okay, no problem there. I probably just do it the way these pins are set up. X and Y. So X, so we're obviously X and negative X are move right and move left, and forward is on the Y. So we're going to put X values in there, and we're going to put Y values in there, right? I do this, and triggered and completed to come in here, and we want to do that, right? Okay, should work. Okay, so now we've done that. We've used the AC movement component on our character, and let's see what happens when we go back and we play again. All right, this time I'm going to just go back down to 1 and do standalone, and I'm going to play. All right, so here's the window. So, okay, I'm going to look down and you can see, oh, okay, so my feet are moving now and I've got the sounds of me walking, but my feet are going all crazy, and there's a reason for that. And the reason is because I'm getting a bunch of errors here, which we'll deal with in a second, okay? Things that we need to solve right from the beginning is the fact that our character is basically standing on the weapon. So I need to go to my firearms, that's back here in my game that I set up, rifles, and I'm using this one here. I believe I'm using that one. Let's just double check. So let's go up to where we spawn it. Let's go to it. Yep, I'm using that one. Okay. And then I need to go to the skeletal mesh, and I need to make sure it's collision presets. Unless you've set up a specific collision preset that'll work, you can see that our pawn and everything are set to ignore, but our visibility channel is set to block. And so since the IK stuff is looking at the visibility channel for where it's hitting so it can determine where to put the feet, they're having some issues. So for now, what I'm going to do until I set up a custom collision channel and change all that, I'm just going to say no collision, and I'm going to say, can the owner step up on this thing? No. Okay. So I'm going to do those two things. All right. And then I'm going to go back and I'm going to do this. All right. So now I'm not stepping on the gun anymore. I'm going to turn in doing forward and back. Okay. So all right, and so since I hate hitting Shift F1, we're going to deal with these errors in a second. Okay, so since I hate doing Shift F1 every single time I want to get out of here, I'm going to open the level blueprint. Oh, I actually have escape already set up. I use the escape key and I set up quick game, and that allows me to escape out. Okay, so I didn't realize I did that already. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and just pause the video here so it's not an hour-long video for one thing. It's already at 48 minutes, so I'll see you guys in the next video. All right.